This is the sea. For thousands of years, the high road between nations, the charted pathway of trade which has linked man with other men. For it was man's ingenuity and skill which solved the mystery of the sea. He created the ship. Man harnessed the forces of the elements, first the winds, and then the giant of expanding steam to propel his ship where and when he so desired. Man has created this marvel, but the ship cannot run itself. Man must continue to control it. To aid him, he made servant the swift and silent power of electricity. He designed, fabricated, and learned to use the maze of machinery that keeps the ship steady on her course despite the elements. Man must also provide the reasons for the ship's existence, the cargoes it carries, the business that calls for the journey of people and their goods from one land to another. The course of man's whole history is traced across the ocean charts of the world.
Hold your course. I'm going below.
Men sail ships, and usually they talk about home.
Only 2 days out. Gosh, it'll be good to see the wife and boy again. Sir, did you ever think of going ashore, leaving the sea, raising chickens or something?
Plenty of time, son. Why?
There's been a lot of scuttlebutt, Captain. We've sort of been thinking maybe we ought to look for jobs ashore.
I hope you're not serious.
Well, sir, we were wondering if our merchant marine will go to pieces, like it did after the First World War.
I guess that's up to the folks at home, John. But maybe this time they'll wake up and realize that America can't get along without a merchant marine. We can't have real prosperity just by buying and selling among ourselves. We've got to have foreign trade, too. Our country grew up on foreign trade. We're not going to scuttle our merchant marine. Why, it helps provide employment for millions of Americans. And at the same time, it's an important part of our national defense. The war taught us that. We've got to look at big things in a big way. Our merchant marine is a part of America, part of our history, our industry, our strength. Think about it. Take a look at this land of ours. Behind the oceans, we've got room to breathe in, to live in, to enjoy. Believe me, a man is lucky to be an American. Our forefathers first came to America across the sea more than 300 years ago. They found a wild and rugged land which they immediately began to clear and to cultivate, to establish their new homes. They depended upon the soil just as we do today. For many years now, our farmers have been supplying not only our own country, but foreign markets too. And in turn, our farmers, all of us, use a lot of things in our daily living that depend upon imports. So we are mighty interested in our merchant marine. The resources of our country are tremendous. We're our own best customers for our lumber, lumber for industries and homes. Timber! Out west, many millions of board feet of lumber are shipped by sea. Talking about the West, it was the steady stream of merchant ships beating their way around the Horn that carried most of the early settlers and supplied their needs. Here's another industry that's made us the strongest nation in the world: oil. I hardly need explain how that oil reaches the refineries. In seagoing tankers, of course. It's the oil and gasoline that keeps our cars and industries moving. Stop that flow, and we're paralyzed. We learned how to pull power out of the land by harnessing our big rivers. The electric power from those dams turns many a machine that makes our civilization what it is today. Puts millions to work in the factories, making goods for the railroads to haul and ships to carry. All this adds up to a brand of living that's known as America, an America of big cities where we organize and direct our business and our industry, an America where we take for granted things like education that are luxuries for others, an America where we are free to thank God in our own way, an America of good homes for most of us and a fine promise for all, an America where we can have fun, where we are able to laugh and shout. America is a land of plenty because we work for it, with our hands and our brains. It's all part of the pattern. The ore has to be dug out of the mines and shipped to the mills where it's turned into iron and steel is the basic material of our heavy industry. They call America the melting pot. Right. We put all our labor into one big melting pot, and out comes the American way of life that has provided the most jobs and the highest standard of living the world has ever seen. Our industry is based on science. We've learned mass production so that more people can afford to buy, and so our products can compete on the world market for overseas sales. But the whole thing depends on each of its parts to make it work. The materials from which these products are made come to the factories from all parts of our country, from many parts of the world. The finished products travel by the network of highways which links every town and village. By truck and train, they go down to the ports on the seacoasts. Just imagine what's in those cars. Grain and flour, automobiles and farm equipment, glassware and pots and pans. Just name it, it'll be there. And down the rivers and canals go the barges, loaded to their gunwales with everything you can think of, bound for the great seaports where these goods start their overseas journey. Without the profits from this export trade, thousands of businesses wouldn't exist. What goes out? New England textiles for Rio de Janeiro. Powdered milk from our dairy farms bound for Singapore. Virginia tobacco for Bristol, England. Husky tractors to clear the jungles of Africa. Road building machinery from Ohio bound for Norway. Diesel locomotives for Natal. Industrial and automotive equipment for all parts of the world. Oil for the lamps of China and Honolulu and Alaska, and lubricants for the world's machinery. Our tanker fleets are the finest and fastest on every ocean. Not all cargoes go abroad, not by a long shot. Intercoastal and coastwise shipping is a big part of our merchant marine's job. Cotton from the Gulf Coast bound for Philadelphia. California wool bound for Boston. Texas sulfur for chemical plants at Wilmington, Delaware. Rolls of roofing paper for Puerto Rico. Pails of paint from Oakland, bound for Puget Sound. Our coastwise and intercoastal ships also link the mainland with Alaska, Panama, and Hawaii. And without ships to carry a large part of American heavy goods between our coasts, our transportation system would become blocked. Yes, sir, our domestic shipping is just as vital to our welfare as our railroads and our highways. Although our coastwise and intercoastal shipping is of vital importance to us, our overseas trade is necessary too. We've got to import as well as export. We need raw materials. From the East Indies and Malaya comes much of our tin and rubber. From India and Ceylon, burlap and spices. From Australia, wool and hides. Hemp and copra from the Philippines. Sugar from Cuba. All mean dollars to foreign countries so they can buy American products and help keep our wheels of industry turning. Aluminum pots and pans and airplanes, and many other items are made from a colorful ore called bauxite. Most bauxite comes from South America. Here's your morning cup of coffee, in the bean from Latin America. Tons of it are unloaded on the docks of great ports like New Orleans every day. Cork from Portugal for bottle tops, for insulation, and many other uses. From the romantic lands of the Caribbean, our merchant marine brings fresh bananas in refrigerated ships. Newsprint for our daily papers, from forests and mills of Canada and Scandinavia. How about the ladies? They need silk from the Orient, and from the Far East come tea and spices and valuable oils. No, the romance of trade isn't dead. Our ships today still carry the same colorful cargoes as in the old days. You'd think most of our exports and imports were carried in our own ships, but up to a few years ago, they weren't. Foreign ships moved most of our cargoes. I'm not saying that our American ships should carry all our trade. We welcome a certain amount of foreign shipping. It promotes peaceful commerce between nations. But let's not depend upon foreign ships. If we do, and those nations withdraw their ships, as they have done twice in a generation, our goods will pile up, waiting for ships that might never return. And our seamen will again be turned away from the sea for lack of jobs. It'll mean scuttling our merchant fleet again. Let's square away and take a look at our history. People forget that the ships and men of the American Merchant Marine were fighting our battles before we had any Army or Navy or Marine Corps. How about John Paul Jones and most of the early seafaring heroes? And the privateers that kept our flag flying on the seas in 1812? Merchantmen, all of them. Don't get any notion we Americans are not a seafaring people, that the seas and the shipping lanes belong to somebody else. Why, we've got more water around us than any other nation. We must live up to our maritime heritage. Our natural trade routes lead across every ocean. The world wants American goods, is ready to sell its products and raw materials to us. In 1936, our government and our shipping industry got together. We began to build new ships, the finest on the seas. And believe me, we acted just in time because it happened.
Newsflash, Japs attack Pearl Harbor.
Overnight, our harbors were blacked out. Our ships went into war paint. Our liberty was close to being blacked out, too. It's mighty easy for people to forget those 4 years. The Murmansk run, when the Jerrys hit us with everything they had. When our tankermen were being burned to a crisp in the Florida Straits. When the Nips declared themselves the masters of the Pacific and all of Asia. But the tide turned. We had some good ships to start with, but not enough for war. So America built them. Built 5,000 ships. Sea-type ships. Liberties. Victories. Then the American shipping industry swung into action with the know-how, the savvy to operate the transportation link that got the stuff from America to the fighting men who needed it. That's how we were able to bring the fight to our enemies, instead of waiting for them to come to our shores. The American Merchant Marine carried 270 million tons of cargo. We were loading an average of 4,000 tons every hour, day and night, during those war years. Do you think there could have been a Normandy invasion without a merchant marine? Or North Africa? Or the Philippines? Or any other operation? Our merchant ships came to anchor off every beachhead, off every coral atoll where men and their supplies were needed. Look at those supplies. Trucks, tanks, guns, ammunition, jeeps, food, clothing, medical supplies. Fantastic quantities of things needed to win a war. We kept it moving farther and farther as our fighting men in the Army and Navy rolled back the Nazis and the Japs. Our tankers carried not only gas and oil, but aircraft too. American shipping delivered the goods. The work went on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, 4,000 tons per hour. Behind every beachhead were the merchant ships, crack passenger liners converted to carry troops, the fightingest guys in the world, a team that won. The American Merchant Marine carried 10 million men to war and home again. This Merchant Marine lost. It could have been us. This Jap Merchant Navy will never sail again. As it went down, Jap garrisons in the overseas empire they grabbed were starved out and beaten. They lost their merchant ships. Their lifeline was cut. The lesson is clear. Without ships, a nation is at the mercy of its enemies. From Attu to Buna, from Guadalcanal to Salerno, they piled ashore from our troop carriers, well-trained and well-equipped for the job ahead. Now, what does all this mean to America's foreign trade of the future? Let's take one story, the Chinese. Just before the war, China was getting on her feet, slowly improving her economy after thousands of years of poverty. She had begun to realize that foreign trade is worthwhile. Our ships were loaded to their plimsoll marks, carrying goods to help modernize her cities and bringing back valuable cargoes for America. The Chinese and the Americans were old friends from those proud days of our clipper ships. I happened to be in China just before the Japs moved in. Her new buildings and paved streets with American cars and trucks and buses seemed a little out of place in this ancient country. Everywhere you could see new life, American equipment, American trademarks. The neon signs made me think of Broadway. Then, the Japs came. For 8 long years, the Chinese fought a bitter battle. But they weren't licked. Today, the Chinese are getting back on their feet, and they are asking for a better way of life. They need help badly. People who know China say that she can use 30,000 locomotives, 300,000 freight cars, 1 million trucks and buses, to name only a few items on a long list. And all this is just a starter for one country, China. America's merchant ships are needed to help the old world catch up with herself. In many countries, whole cities are gone, wiped out. Much of the world's pre-war equipment and supplies have gone up in smoke, smashed. What's left is worn out or used up because replacements have been impossible.
Over the face of the civilized world, Europe, Asia, Africa, the winds of war have swept, bringing death, destruction, and desolation. Homes and churches, hospitals and libraries, the growth of centuries of culture and science and patient building are twisted and blackened in the Holocaust. Famine and disease stalk the silent people still living in the wreckage. Hope is a mirage to the people of these lands, but it's a mirage of the sea, over which can come help from America, help in America's merchant ships.
I've seen something I'll never forget. Our merchant marine turned overnight from a wartime operation to a life-saving organization on a worldwide scale. We brought corn from our farms to the hungry people of the world. Talk about beating swords back into plowshares. We brought shiploads of grain from our wheat fields as a part of that historic relief program. I think of the Bible. That was certainly bread cast upon the waters. The merchant marine rushed farm animals from our western ranges to restock the ruined farms of Europe and many another land. For many years to come, European farmers will tell their sons how American merchant ships brought them new herds and grain and equipment to help them start life over again. We hauled coal from our mines to keep millions from freezing to death. We loaded timbers from our forests to rebuild the broken dikes of Holland and lumber for hospitals and shelters. All this in the same ships that a few months before were hauling bombs and artillery, soldiers and their supplies. Then the last big war job, and a mighty happy one for the folks waiting back home. The merchant marine brought back our boys, millions of them. After the First World War, our doughboys waited many a month for lack of ships to bring them home again. The war paint came off, and once more the stacks and flags are carrying the shipping line insignias, known all over the world. The shipping companies did their job without much glory, you might say, during the war. Now wartime secrecy is over. The naval architects and designers are at work again on new and better ships. The war-built merchant fleet has left us with some fine vessels, but we must have new and special designs to keep up our superiority in peacetime trade. We need new passenger ships, for example, that will provide the best travel accommodations possible. And our shipyards. If we are to make use of all the know-how we've acquired in the past years, we must continue to build ships. Already some new liners are on the ways, but there should be more, so Americans can travel on American ships. Shipbuilding, too, you know, is essential to the welfare of the United States. The products needed to build a ship must come from all parts of the nation. A big boost for employment, a necessity to keep production lines moving. A ship is the work of the entire country, not of just a few men. But good ships need good men to sail them. It was a mighty fine day when the United States Merchant Marine Academy was founded. These young fellows have already been to sea as cadet midshipmen. They're not only capable seamen, but as merchant officers, they will be our ambassadors of goodwill in every port of call. They come from the farms, the small towns, the cities, from all over our country. Ships, we have some good ships in our merchant marine. Men to sail the ships, we've got them. They are the best fed and the highest paid seamen in the world. But we must face the future squarely. Our ships need American cargoes and passengers to keep them in operation. We should have learned by now that our American merchant marine, which has served us so valiantly in war and is so vital in peace, is worth fighting for. Let's keep it sailing along all our coasts and across every sea. Now that peace is here, we Americans are going to travel and see the world we helped save from tyranny and injustice. We are going to travel in safety and comfort on our own ships.
The Romans had a name for it. They called the limits of the ancient ocean Mare Nostrum, our sea. This is our sea, ours to sail and share, for the ocean is no barrier. It's the high road to a better world over which men of all nations will travel and exchange their goods. It's the high road to peace and understanding. Every American has a stake in this great new merchant marine. So let's take our bearings. Let's set a bold course which will forever keep the American flag sailing across the world's great sea lanes.